Welcome to the Belly Button Window channel and episode 41 of the Jimi Hendrix story, like you've never heard it before. In this episode, we deep dive into March and April of 1970. In an action-packed installment, we explore Jimi's spur-of-the-moment trip to London, release of the Band of Gypsys album and reviews, and ending with the first two concerts of the Cry of Love US tour. Please remember to check the channel's community tab and video information page, where you will find links to related videos, performances and stunning photographs from the period. By the spring of 1970, Jimi Hendrix had arrived at a crossroads in his life and career. His circumstances required decisions, if not solutions. Hendrix had not toured since June 1969 and had played only a handful of concerts since then. His ad hoc band, Gypsy Suns and Rainbows, headlined Woodstock in August 1969 and performed at the United Block Association's benefit concert in Harlem 2 weeks later. Although playing with this ensemble undoubtedly contributed to Jimi's development as a musician and served his need to hang out with friends under relaxed conditions, its cumbersome numbers and level of talent didn't promise a touring band. Nonetheless, with Mitch Mitchell on drums and Billy Cox on bass, this interim group held the seeds for a later, tighter band. In fall and winter, 1969 to 1970, Hendrix's experimental Band of Gypsys spent an inordinate amount of time jamming in the studio, then headlined at Bill Graham's Fillmore East on New Year's Eve and Day. But that band too burst apart from various pressures and disintegrated on stage at the Winter Festival for Peace at New York City's Madison Square Garden on the 28th of January 1970. Jimi's recording situation was no less troubled. He hadn't finished more than a handful of tracks since producing Electric Ladyland nearly 2 years earlier, and Ed Chalpin's contractual claims needed to be addressed. Eddie Kramer spent February 1970 mixing the Band of Gypsys live LP. It would be released in the US on the 25th of March 1970, but by that time, Jimi had already moved on. He had to be free. On the brighter side, construction resumed on Hendrix's dream studio in New York City, Electric Lady. That meant Jimi had to tour and generate cash. With his predatory manager, Michael Jeffrey, undoubtedly applying pressure for a lucrative tour, Jimi flirted with reforming the Experience. But his feeble attempt to convince Rolling Stone writer John Burks in a farcical interview on the 4th of February 1970 fell short of convincing, and Jimi ultimately balked at Noel's return. Instead, Jimi asked old friend Billy Cox to take over on bass guitar, and Mitch Mitchell would resume his role as Jimi's drummer. Early March 1970. Having learned that Kathy Etchingham was married, Jimi called her on the phone in London. Etchingham, in her book Through Gypsy Eyes, explains, "I hadn't heard from Jimi for a while, and apparently he was having problems. He had a disastrous gig at Madison Square Gardens and walked off stage. Around this time, someone must have told him about me getting married to Ray. And so, Jimi rang to find out if it was true. 'Yes, I'm married,' I told him innocently. 'Are you going to be there next weekend?' Jimi asked. 'Yes,' I said, assuming he intended to phone back then. 10 minutes later, he called to tell me he would be flying into London on the Saturday and asked me to pick him up at the airport. I agreed and booked a limo to Heathrow as usual." Saturday, the 7th of March, Jimi Hendrix flies from New York City to London. Kathy Etchingham goes on to say, "Jimi turned up on the early morning flight looking a complete wreck. I was amazed to see that he was alone, because I had never known him to travel without some sort of company before. On the way back into town, he held my hand in the back of the car. 'This is just a spur-of-the-moment thing, isn't it?' he said in his voice, quiet and intense. 'It's not serious, is it?' I was startled to see how completely devastated he was by the news. I suddenly realized he had pictured our relationship completely differently. He may have been sleeping around in America, but he hadn't met anyone else he wanted as a permanent partner. He had imagined that I would be waiting for him, the good little woman keeping the home fires burning until my man came back from earning our living. Not so very different to Chaz Chandler's idea of how relationships should work after all, but I wasn't willing to give up my life to be a rock and roll widow. 'Does anyone in New York know that you are here?' I asked, trying to keep the conversation light. 'I don't have to tell them everything,' he replied, his head hanging down, his whole body looking limp. 'Why don't you come back to New York with me?' he suggested. 'I can't do that, Jimi,' I said. 'Why not? We can go back. Everything will be all right. All those people I was hanging out with have gone.' 'No, Jimi,' I interrupted. 'It's not going to happen. Everything is different now.' He kept arguing for a while, but I knew he wasn't going to change my mind. Kathy Etchingham continues, "I told Jimi that Ray had moved into the flat with me, so he couldn't stay there and booked him into the Londonderry Hotel in Park Lane. After the first couple of days of trying to persuade me to change my mind, he seemed to realize that I wasn't going to budge and gave up. Of their time together in London, she recalled, he jammed in the studio with Stephen Stills and Graham Nash one day, and that seemed to lift his spirits. On another day, he asked me to go shopping with him and bought me a pair of snakeskin boots. We were like two very old friends on a day out together, and I felt a wave of relief he had come to terms with what had happened. It was over, but we could still be a part of one another's lives. Kathy adds that Jimmy had shown no interest in the stuff left at Brook Street, so when the time came for me to move, I had to decide what to keep and what to throw away. There was a cupboard which was stuffed with all the paintings and drawings Jimmy had done during his time in London, many of them inspired by acid. I had no idea what to do with any of it, so I binned the lot. It didn't occur to me that one day they would be of any value or interest. Friday the 13th of March, at the Revolution Club in London. Jimmy attends the Rubber Duck concert. Sunday the 15th of March, Island Studios, studio recordings, with Stephen Stills doing Old Times Good Times. Monday the 16th of March, Hendrix is interviewed by Keith Altman at the Speakeasy. Tuesday the 17th of March, at Olympic Studios, studio recordings, with Arthur Lee and Love on the tracks Everlasting First, Slick Dick and Ride That Vibration. Wednesday the 18th of March. At the Speakeasy, Jimmy takes part in an after-hours jam with Stephen Stills. Then Thursday the 19th of March, Jimmy departs London flying to New York City. March 23rd, at the Sound Center in New York City, Jimmy participates in a session with Noel Redding and his group Fat Mattress, working on the track My Friend, unreleased and not to be confused with Hendrix's song of the same name. Then at the Record Plant, studio recording, in particular the solo on Midnight Lightning. March 24th, back at the Record Plant, working on the tracks Bleeding Heart, with drummer Steve Angel, Midnight Lightning and Earth Blues. March 25th, 1970. The Band of Gypsys album is released in the USA through Capitol Records. Track listing: Side 1, Who Knows, Machine Gun. Side 2, Changes, Power of Soul, Message to Love, and We Gotta Live Together. The following Band of Gypsys album review, by Gary Von Tersch, appeared in Rolling Stone, published the 28th of May 1970. This is the album that Hendrix owed Capitol for releasing him over to Reprise Records, and significantly, it isn't a studio effort, as his Reprise efforts have been, which is not to imply that it is any better than those Experience albums. The context of the album is vital. Band of Gypsys was one of Hendrix's 1969 amalgamations, consisting of Buddy Miles on drums and Billy Cox on bass, among others. They hadn't been together very long when this session was recorded live at the Fillmore East, New Year's Eve 1969-70, and the music shows it. Both sides are basically extended jams with lots of powerful together guitar by Hendrix, able bass by Cox, at times overbearing drums by Miles and rather lame, buried vocals by both Hendrix and Miles. The group sound is surprisingly similar to Hendrix's old Foxy Lady and Purple Haze days, with the significant difference that here Hendrix really gets into his guitar playing. No more the flashy, crotch-oriented gimmickry and extended wah-wahs. Here he just stands still and shows us how adept he is with the axe. The support from Cox is always inventive, but Miles' drumming is definitely disturbing and exceedingly pedestrian at times. Hendrix overcomes on pure tension alone, as both Message to Love and Who Knows aptly demonstrate. The problem is the vocals. All the tunes are new ones, and with Hendrix's weird poetic sensitivity, akin to Leroy Jones in effect at times, it would have been a large improvement had we been presented with a little less drumming and a lot more vocal. The excitement and hypnotic compression so apparent in the music would have been pressed home even more forcefully behind Hendrix's drawing, heavenly inflected voice, because Hendrix is not just a run-of-the-mill R&B singer. His voice is just as much an instrument as his guitar. But it's all just potential this time out, with the one exception of the 12-minute Machine Gun, dedicated to all the soldiers who are fighting in Chicago, Milwaukee, and New York, and, oh yes, all the soldiers fighting in Vietnam. Here, the Hendrix vocal is in the forefront and perfectly matched to his most desperate driving guitar solo ever. You can hear the sirens wailing, and the entire mood, even down to Miles' drumming, is one of confrontation and freneticism mixed in equal parts. This album is Hendrix the musician. With just bass and drum support, He's able to transfuse and transfix on the strength of his guitar work alone. While the following commentary appeared in Guitar World, titled Machine Gun, Jimi Hendrix Band of Gypsies, 1970. Contrary to popular belief, Hendrix was not in any kind of artistic decline during the last year of his life. In fact, it was quite the opposite. This apocalyptic performance of Machine Gun, featuring Billy Cox on bass and Buddy Miles on drums, demonstrates that Jimi was still growing in leaps and bounds near the end. But while Band of Gypsies captures some of the guitarist's greatest improvisations to date, he was still dissatisfied with its outcome. I distinctly remember that Jimi wasn't particularly excited with Band of Gypsies, says engineer Eddie Kramer, who recorded the album and co-mixed and edited it with Hendrix. He felt that Buddy Miles was trying to steal his thunder throughout the performance with his excessive scat singing. I can still see Jimi with his head buried in his arms, laying on the mixing console during playback saying, "Buddy, would you please just shut up?" So I would chop out huge passages of Buddy singing, and then I'd chop some more. According to English rock guitarist Robin Trower, I found the album Band of Gypsies magnificent. Machine Gun, in particular, had a strong influence on me, without a doubt. What he plays on this song is some of the best stuff ever played on an electric guitar. It's one of the most beautiful moments ever recorded. March 1970, Jimi Hendrix writes the first draft of a screenplay for a film which he intended to direct. The movie would be called Moondust, and it would tell the tale of how Hendrix encountered a UFO during his childhood. According to GYPSYS, the manager of community engagement at the Museum of Pop Culture, inspired by an alleged UFO sighting during his childhood, Hendrix became fascinated with science fiction and began writing his own short stories. He even insisted on going by the nickname Buster, after Buster Crabbe, the actor that played Flash Gordon, a show he was obsessed with. If it were not for a close encounter of another kind, with the guitar his father bought him for his 16th birthday, perhaps in another life, Hendrix would have been a science fiction author, screenplay writer, or maybe even a movie producer or actor. "Imagination is the key to my lyrics," he once said. "The rest is painted with a little science fiction." According to John McDermott, the catalogue director and producer for Experience Hendrix, Chaz Chandler, Hendrix's friend, musician, producer and manager, was a huge science fiction buff. When Hendrix lived with Chandler in London, Chandler shared his extensive science fiction library, which Hendrix enthusiastically consumed. It is no coincidence that it was during this time that Hendrix would pen some of his most popular science fiction-inspired songs. Purple Haze, inspired by Philip Jose Farmer's Night of Light, and Third Stone from the Sun, inspired by George R. Stewart's Earth Abides, the latter of the two tracks produced by, you guessed it, Chandler. While the website Far Out magazine elaborated further, the handwritten script was scribbled by Hendrix between 1969 and 1970, in a rock opera that coupled the powerful effects of rock and roll music with extraterrestrial encounters. The truly original work was set to be a movie like no other, featuring scenes where an innocent little girl first hears a rock band while cautiously sheltering behind the rock and envisions the music as dragons and mystic beasts dueling in the air. The fanciful screenplay offers a great insight into the mind of Hendrix himself. And while Hendrix's love of science fiction, a love that was dwarfed only by his love of music, it places him with the likes of George Clinton, Sun Ra, and other black musical icons revered in the world of Afrofuturism, a movement in literature, music, and film featuring fantasy and science fiction themes rooted in black history and cultural aesthetic. He did not hesitate to blend the two. Wednesday, the 8th of April, sees the American release of the single from the Band of Gypsies. Stepping Stone and Isabella released through Reprise Records. Tuesday, the 14th of April, Jimi is charged by the New York police. The two offenses noted were driver not having a driving license and vehicle not registered with the state of New York. Thursday, the 16th of April, interview by Keith Altham in Jimi's New York apartment. Saturday, the 18th of April, Hendrix flies from New York to Los Angeles. Thursday, the 23rd of April, Jimi attends Glen Cornick's birthday party in Laurel Canyon. Glen Cornick was a founding member of Jethro Tull, although shortly after this party, Cornick was fired from the group. The exact circumstances of Cornick's departure from Jethro Tull remain mysterious, while their 1970 American tour was drawing to a close, although Tull's press team highlighted Cornick's preference for the party lifestyle, which was at odds with the living philosophy of the band, When pressed later on in life, Cornick did not elaborate, saying only, "I was fired." Saturday the 25th of April, commencement of the Cry of Love tour. Jimi managed to have his 1970 American tour scheduled for weekends to allow him weekdays to devote to studio work on his envisioned double album, tentatively titled First Rays of the New Rising Sun. Hendrix, Billy Cox, and Mitch Mitchell opened a 30-date American tour in California with 2 back-to-back concerts on the last weekend in April 1970. Apparently, the new trio established itself in Los Angeles in mid-month to prepare for the tour, though no tapes of those rehearsals have surfaced. As Billy Cox recalled in the book The Jimi Hendrix Sessions, "After the business at Madison Square Garden, I was real suspect. I agreed to come back in February, but that fell apart as well. I didn't hear from Jimi for about a month, then I got a phone call. He promised that I would have no hassles, so, like a fool, I came back for the 3rd time," Cox recalled. Mitch was cool. He didn't even talk about the band of gypsies. He just went about his business. There was a real respect between Mitch and Jimi. We just got down to playing. The band quickly caught fire. While less nimble and cerebral than Noel Redding, Billy Cox added a soulful thunder to Hendrix's new band that the thin British bassist never mustered. Mitch Mitchell's amazing technical skills and ability to read Jimi's mind made him the chosen drummer for any Hendrix group. Jimi could now blend experienced tunes with the band of gypsies' more experimental music. More importantly, Jimi would debut fresh compositions with a new sound. According to Mitch, though the new band could produce great music, there would be little show. Hendrix now largely disdained his earlier histrionics, and of course Billy Cox didn't go for flash. In Hendrix's mind, the music should speak for itself. Saturday, the 25th of April, the Forum, Los Angeles, California, with support acts Buddy Miles Express and Ballin Jack. Concert setlist: Spanish Castle Magic, Foxy Lady, Lover Man, Getting My Heart Back Together Again, Message to Love, Easy Rider, Machine Gun, Room Full of Mirrors, Hey Baby, Instrumental Solo and Freedom, The Star Spangled Banner, Purple Haze, and Voodoo Child, Slight Return, / Midnight Lightning. According to music journalist and author Sharon Lawrence, Jimi appeared in Los Angeles in concert to a sold-out show at the Forum. This night, several hundred young black men and women were on hand to check him out. I observed their curiosity and gradually their pride. This white folks' black rock star was something else. They cheered and jumped to their feet, joining the entire rocking arena, and they applauded the musician whose records seldom received airplay on black radio stations. While Mitch Mitchell recalled, the Forum gig was not very memorable. We went in, did the gig and left, and it shouldn't have been that way. And John Platt wrote, "From the outset, it became obvious to Mitch that the new band, although capable of producing good music, felt less exciting than the old one. With Mitch saying that, I have to say that most of the gigs were unmemorable, the same old places, yet again. Billy Cox held things down very nicely, never any problem at all, a really stable person. But it was really starting to lose its rock and roll flavor, even though on some gigs, we did deliver the goods." Sunday, the 26th of April, performing at the Cal EXPO, Sacramento, California, with support acts Buddy Miles Express and Blue Mountain Eagle. Concert setlist: Lover Man, Spanish Castle Magic, Freedom, Machine Gun, Foxy Lady, Room Full of Mirrors, Easy Rider, Purple Haze, The Star Spangled Banner, and Voodoo Child, Slight Return. Jimi Plays Sacramento by Phil Carson. Following the LA Forum, Hendrix and company flew north to Sacramento to headline an afternoon outdoor gig at Cal EXPO at the State Fairgrounds. The State Fairgrounds just east of downtown included a large oval racetrack with a grandstand along the straightaway on the west side. For the concert, promoters erected a stage at the foot of the grandstand, facing up into the seats. About 8,000 tickets were sold. California audiences had not seen Jimi since June 1969, during an outdoor festival with mixed results at the Newport Pop Festival in Northridge. The LA Forum show proved to be a blistering performance that lasted a full hour and a half. The set contained most of the songs that he played the next day at Cal EXPO, and indeed, on the rest of his American tour. 7 songs came from the Experience songbook, 4 from the Band of Gypsies, and 3 were completely new. Photographs of Jimi at the Forum show capture him in a distinctive red, white, and blue headband, a dark, ruffled shirt, floral vest, faux leopard skin belt, and black pants with leather patches. It's likely that Jimi enjoyed partying after his show in LA. Sunrise may have caught him by surprise. Promoters for the show at EXPO in Sacramento ignored Hendrix's name for his new band and advertised the Jimi Hendrix Experience in a beautiful afternoon concert. Fans were invited to bring a picnic lunch, a blanket and a smile. Ironically, an entity known as Strong Winds presented the show. Music would begin at 3 p.m. The flyer said other groups to be announced, and by showtime, a group known as Blue Mountain Eagle and the Buddy Miles Express would open the event. Photos of Hendrix reveal him with the same choker and medallion round his neck and in the same floral vest as the night before. It is hard to tell if he has the same or a very similar dark ruffled shirt at EXPO as at the Forum show the night before. The same red, white and blue scarf appears round his head. As it is somewhat unusual to see Jimmy wear the same outfit 2 days in a row, there is a possibility that Hendrix did not sleep between the two concerts, nor even changed his clothes. According to Dave Hatfield in the next day's Sacramento Union, it was cloudy, cold and windy in the grandstand, but the approximately 17,000 spectators, mostly in their 20s, kept warm clapping and dancing to the music. Hatfield noted that Hendrix kept the crowd moving to the sound of his amplified electric guitar music, and when he did Foxy Lady, the audience burst into cheers. John F. Hurst, writing for the Sacramento Bee, pegged the crowd at only 8,000, perhaps relying on official ticket sales. Part of the experience, it turned out, he wrote later, was chilling wind, a lot of poor vantage points and some freaky acoustics. Added to that, Hurst continued, the music was a little like the progress of the Wright brothers' flight at Kitty Hawk, taking wing now and then, but always settling back to earth after a short hop. Right in front of the stage the music was clear, but here and there in the reaches of the crowd, the acoustics made the music sound mushy and or distorted, depending on the kind of echo you were getting. Hendrix, bright band around his natural afro, wielding his guitar, left-handed, like an extra loose-footed limb, sang and played his way through some sensual music. It mourned, it shouted, it bragged, it belted. And it ranged, in style and tempo, from turgid to hectic. But few heads moved, bobbing and swaying with the beat, as happens when a crowd really gets turned on. There was a lot of intent listening, though. Perhaps it is hard to get a current going between players and audience over all that open space. Hendrix did get through to the crowd toward the end, though. He did it with a searing guitar rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner, complete with sound effects for the rockets and the bombs. That got the crowd excited, and it grooved with him as he closed out on a stately blues. That concludes this installment of the series. Stay tuned for the next episode, where we will begin the deep dive into May 1970 of the Jimi Hendrix story and the continuing Cry of Love US tour. Don't forget to subscribe for future content updates. And by the way, if you have any photos, stories, or anecdotes to contribute, we would love to hear from you. Until next time.